This is Big Ideas from the ABC.
Welcome. I'm Kerry O'Brien, and our guest here tonight is possibly known to some of you because he's already put in one performance at this festival. Peter Beinart is author, academic, journalist and commentator. And he does now know how to attract attention. He's just recently published his book, The Icarus Syndrome on American Hubris. But just a couple of months before that publication, he wrote an essay for the New York Review of Books in which he asserted that the American Jewish establishment had failed. And you might be surprised to know that that excited a little bit of attention and debate. And he's brought that debate to Australia with him. He's going to share it with us tonight. Now, I'm going to ask Peter to talk to us for a bit, and then we're going to have a conversation on the stage and inviting you to participate. Would you please welcome Peter Beinart?
Thank you very much for having me. It's slightly odd that I'm talking about this subject since I actually have a book out that I know my publisher is very eager for you to buy that I don't think has the word Jews in it, except perhaps in the acknowledgements. And this is actually the topic of my next book. So I hope that if this is a subject of interest to you, you'll sustain that interest into when you can actually buy a book about it and make it worth the while of my publisher. This is a sensitive topic in the United States, again, I gather here as well, and the sensitivity of the topic of the relationship between diaspora Jews and Israel was brought home to me a little while after I wrote my piece in the New York Review of Books, when my mother told me that, she said, "I hope you realize that it's a good thing your grandmother doesn't know how to blog." I wanted to start with a story. Something happened just before I left for Australia, actually. In my household, once it became known that I was going to Australia, my son became extremely interested in the topic of Tasmanian devils. And that's really what captured his imagination about Australia. So we were on my laptop watching videos of Tasmanian devils. He was a little disappointed that they were not larger, but I tried to convince him that they were pretty fierce. And we were watching for a little while, and he went off, and he went to the bathroom. So I started checking my email, and I had an email from a friend in Israel. And I opened the email, and it was a video that my friend and someone else had actually shot. And so I started watching this video. And it's a scene in the West Bank, and there's a father, a man is being arrested. He's being kind of led into some kind of army van by a group of soldiers. And he has been arrested for stealing water, for illegally hooking up his village to the Israeli water system. Now, one of the topics that Israeli human rights organizations have written a lot about over the years is the inequity in water policy, in which settlers use about 4 times as much water as do Palestinian villagers. And about 200,000 or so Palestinian villages are actually not set up to the water system at all, which leads to this theft of water. It's really not surprising when you think about it that Israeli settlers would have more water than Palestinian villagers because they can vote in Israeli elections, so they can agitate for more water for their settlements. And since Palestinians can't vote in Israeli elections, they tend to end up on the short end of the stick when it comes to water for their villages. And I was watching this video. It was a difficult scene to watch. There were women around kind of screaming, and there's a boy in the video. And the boy is trying to get to his father. The boy is about my son's age, maybe a year older or so. He's trying to get to his father. He's being prevented from getting to his father. And I'm listening, and then all of a sudden I realize he's yelling, "Baba, Baba," which is actually what my son calls me. Because when my son was very little, we thought he would call me Abba, which is Hebrew for father, but he couldn't say Abba. So he started to say Baba, which we really liked. That was very cute. So he calls me Baba. So I froze, and then I saw my son was coming back. So I thought, Jesus, I got to get back to these Tasmanian devils. This is not something that I want him to see. And it raised a question that I've thought a lot about in recent months, which is essentially what happens when my son is not 4.5, but what happens when he's 8 or 12 or 16? You know, he has a big Israeli flag, homemade kind of Israeli flag that he made in preschool in his room. He's a little budding Zionist, which is a source of great pride for me. And I don't want to snuff out that Zionism. And yet I don't want to raise a son who walls himself off, who makes himself morally dead to the images that I was watching on that computer. And it turns out that, in fact, there was an explanation that the Israeli Defense Forces had offered for this picture because they knew it had gotten around a bit and it had been affecting to people. And they said, in fact, it was a staged image, that the parents had, that the mother had encouraged her son to try to get to the father and be hysterical. And I thought, well, I could try to tell my son that in fact, this is the way that Palestinians are. You know, it's not authentic emotion of the son seeing his father going away. It's actually he's been put up to it. And I thought that we as a community in the United States have really, for a long time, taken essentially the path of turning off the computer. Or if we can't turn off the computer, essentially coming up with some kind of explanation to make it easy to deal with morally, to suggest that this is really, if there's any suffering at all, it's really always the Palestinians bringing it on themselves. And it seems to me, 43 years on after the beginning of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, that this has failed not only as a moral strategy, but it's actually failed as a Zionism strategy. It's actually failed to produce a robust, serious, vibrant Zionism amongst young American Jews. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think this strategy has failed. Not only failed our moral obligations to the Palestinians and to Israeli democracy, but indeed failed to produce an authentic Zionism in the United States. And I want to do that by dividing the American Jewish community into 3 parts, a kind of a triangle. At the top of the triangle is what I call the American Jewish Establishment, the major American communal Jewish organizations, AIPAC, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. You know, Jews are the only group that has to have an organization just made up of the presidents of other Jewish American organizations. What defines these groups really is 2 things. Sociologically, what defines them is that their members are mostly secular, relatively secular, people for whom Zionism is a kind of substitute, I would say, in general, for religious observance. Zionism has become their Jewish identity. And for many of them really it emerged as their Jewish identity in those terrifying days just before the Six-Day War, and then in the aftermath of the 73 War, when it seemed like the world was turning against Israel. Ideologically, what defines these organizations is I think, a kind of contradiction. If you ask them, read their websites about why they believe that America should stand in support of Israel, why they themselves support Israel, they do not say that they do it simply because they are Jews and Israel is a Jewish state. They are very emphatic that they believe that they themselves and America should support Israel because Israel is a liberal democratic Jewish state that shares American-style ideals of human rights. And they're very passionate about defending not just Israel, but Israeli democracy against external threats like Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas. And that's perfectly fine. As well, they should do those things. And yet, never do they contemplate the idea that, in fact, Israeli democracy could be threatened from within, that defending Israeli democracy, that standing with Israeli democracy could, in fact, lead you to need to be critical of actions of the Israeli government that threaten Israeli democracy. So you find a strange kind of position often. On the one hand, American Jewish organizations are always saying that one of the reasons we look with pride to Israel is that Israel is always a democracy. And yet at the same time they say that the occupation of the West Bank, in which 2.5 million Palestinians do not have the right to vote, are not citizens of any state, i.e. a part of Israel, a place that Israel occupied in 1967 that is not a democracy, that is not a problem. On the one hand, these organizations defended for many years Israel's blockade of Gaza, a blockade that prevented not just parts that could be used to make weapons, but notebooks and toys, and chocolate and eyeglasses. They defended that blockade, and then when the Israeli government limited the blockade and got rid of a lot of those prohibitions, they congratulated the Israeli government for having changed the policy. To read the speeches of the leaders of the American Jewish organizations, you would never know that Israel had a foreign minister who in his youth was a member of Meir Kahana's explicitly racist Koch party, which advocated the forced removal of Palestinians and Arab Israelis from the land of Israel. You would never know that it has a foreign minister who has suggested paying Israeli citizens Arab citizens of Israel to leave the country. You would never know that Israel has a foreign minister who has tried to criminalize the public observance of the Nakba, the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in 1948, or that Israel has a foreign minister at one of whose major rallies in 2009, according to Haaretz, many of his observers were seen standing on the street outside yelling "Death to Arabs." That's the leader of Israel's third largest party. In the mock high school elections held in Israel in 2009, he didn't come in third, he came in first. You would never know that Israel has a housing minister who recently said that he saw it as his national duty to prevent the Arab population with Israel from quote-unquote spreading, and said he thought it was immoral for Jews and Arabs to live under the same roof. Or that the leader of that party, Shas, the fifth largest party in Israel, Rav Ovadia Yosef, has called Arabs snakes, ants, and vermin. You would never know that in this spring, in the Tel Aviv University poll of Israeli high school students, 56% of Israeli high school students and 82% of religious Israeli Jewish high school students said they did not believe that Arab Israelis should be allowed to vote for the Knesset. Or that in 2007, according to a poll from Geocartographer, that 60% of Israelis said they would not approve of having an Arab live in their apartment building. This world doesn't exist for the American Jewish organizations. What they do, one of their functions is to create a Disneyfied vision of Israel, an Israel that essentially freezes the Israel of their memory, of when they came to their love of Zionism, when the occupation was still in its very, very early days, a more secular kind of kibbutznik Israel in which, before the Russian immigration that produced Avigdor Lieberman, before the creation of the Shas party, before Gush Emunim and the settler movement that was created in the 1970s. And this has been their way of reaffirming their own Zionist identity. It works for them, but it is not working for a younger generation. These people are not reproducing themselves. And so if you look at the younger part of the American Jewish community, the bottom of this triangle, you see two very, very different things. On the one hand, you see an Orthodox population in which Zionism is very, very vibrant. So most non-Orthodox American Jews think that Orthodox Jews are a very small percentage of the American population. But in fact, they're growing very dramatically as a percentage of the American population. While only 12% of American Jews over the age of 60 are Orthodox, 34% between the ages of 18 and 24 are Orthodox. And in the United States, when we call people Orthodox, we don't mean people who have an Orthodox shul that they don't go to. To call someone Orthodox in the United States is actually to suggest a very high level of religious observance. And in that corner of the American Jewish community, Zionism is being transmitted very effectively, a very vibrant Zionism to younger American Jews. When the American Jewish Committee asked people 18 to 30 whether they felt very close to the state of Israel in 2006, amongst Orthodox Jews, young Orthodox Jews, the answer was 79%. But this Zionism that is emerging amongst younger Orthodox Jews does often not even pay lip service to the idea that one of the reasons that we would love Israel, that we would be Zionists, is that Israel is a liberal democratic state. In fact, what you often find in the Orthodox Jewish community in the United States is a Zionism of the land, a Zionism that privileges the importance of the land often over the rights and dignity of all the people, Jewish and Palestinian, on the land.